Life, in all its shapes and sizes, is extraordinary. The simple idea of any species' existence in the first place is a miracle in and of itself. Nature, through its painstakingly slow process of trial and error known as evolution, has been made in such a way that almost every nook and cranny on the planet has become home to a particular species of plant or animal that fit together to near perfection. And not only that, but the fact that all of these species strikes (8) Lepidodendrons. Also known as the scale tree, the lepidodendron was by far the most abundant plant species of the Carboniferous period. During this time, the Earth experienced its highest levels of atmospheric oxygen, leading plants to grow and die at a much greater rate than ever before. Temperatures were also higher back then, and the lepidodendron spread throughout most of the world, particularly in the northern hemisphere. It was so abundant that it now makes up much of the coal deposits all over the world. The Carboniferous period lasted from about 359 to about 299 million years ago, but fossils have been discovered as late as 205 million years ago in present-day China. The closest relatives today are club mosses, but unlike their modern counterparts, the lepidodendron towered 130 feet into the air, and their trunks grew to 6 feet in diameter. But instead of actual wood, the trunk was made out mostly of soft tissue. What gave it resistance, however, was its thick, scale-like bark. 8. Lepidodendrons. Also known as the scale tree. 7. Silphium. Dr. John M. Riddle, a historian at North Carolina State University, has long been studying ancient civilizations. And he came to the conclusion that ancient peoples such as the Egyptians, the Greeks, and the Romans purposely kept their populations low. But while some argued that this was because of high infant mortality rate and people constantly dying in wars, he pointed out that the biggest population decreases happened mostly during periods of peace and prosperity. This meant that they were using some form of contraception. This is where silphium comes in. This was a plant, possibly related to parsley. 7. Silphium. Dr. John M. Riddle. 6. Araucaria arizonicum. Even though this ancient tree and the Araucaria mirabilis mentioned before are separated by several thousand miles and 47 million years, they both share a somewhat similar story. As the name suggests, the Araucaria arizonicum once grew in abundance in what is now Arizona. But some 207 million years ago, the once-lush forest was covered by ash and lava flows from nearby volcanoes, thus petrifying the forest in place. Scattered all across the almost barren desert floor, there are sections of multicolored tree trunks that make up the Petrified Forest National Park in east-central Arizona. These ancient trees once grew to 197 feet and had a diameter of about 10 feet. Its closest living relatives are the monkey puzzle tree in South America and the Norfolk Island pine. The Navajo believe the stone trees to be the bones of a great giant killed long ago by their ancestors, while the Paiute Indians saw them as arrow shafts used by their thunder god, Shinoav. Only in 1888, with the Smithsonian curator F. H. Knowlton, were these fossils identified for what they really were. But once people learned their real identity, they began rampantly gathering the petrified wood to make tables, tiles, jewelry, and all sorts of other objects from them. With the area becoming a national monument in 1906 and then a national park in 1962, the plundering slowed down a bit, but even today it is estimated that 13 tons of petrified tree material is being spirited away by tourists every year. 6. Araucaria arizonicum. Even 5. Glossopteris. Back in 1912, Alfred Lothar Wegener, a German meteorologist, polar researcher, and geophysicist, first came up with the theory that continents are slowly drifting across the face of the planet. Thanks to him, and to modern technology such as GPS satellites, we now know for certain that this is happening even as we speak. But back in the early 1900s and up until the 1950s, this theory was quite controversial. Nevertheless, he first thought of this possibility when he realized that the continents kinda fit with each other if we were to push them together, as is the case with Africa and South America, for instance. To prove his theory, he traveled on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean and analyzed the fossil records for similarities. And to his surprise, many of them were a match. And possibly the most widespread fossil evidence came from a plant known as Glossopteris. 5. Glossopteris. '4. The Franklin tree. Named after Benjamin Franklin, the Franklin tree, or Franklinia latomaha, is a species that was native only to Georgia, growing in the wild only along the banks of the Altamaha River, near Darien in McIntosh County. It was first discovered by botanist John Bartram and his son William in 1765. He described it as a shrub, growing some 20 feet high, and being somewhat similar to the loblolly bay plant, but with larger and more fragrant flowers. It has dark green leaves that turn red, orange, and pink in the fall, and forms some 3-inch white flowers from late summer until frost first appears. When John Bartram returned to the site in the 1770s, he discovered that the Franklin tree was only growing on a narrow patch of land. 4. The Franklin tree. 3. Streechnose electri. Back in 1986, George Poyner, an entomologist at Oregon State University, went on a field trip to the Dominican Republic to retrieve around 500 fossils encased in amber that were discovered in a minute there. And in the following 30 years, he analyzed the many insects that made up that batch. But in 2015, he sent some high-resolution photos of several flowers also encased in the amber to Professor Lena Strew at Rutgers University. Since the flowers were in perfect condition, she was able to deduce that they belonged to the Streechnose genus of flowering plants that exist today, which are all poisonous to one degree or another. These plants contain strychnine, an alkaloid used in pesticides such as rat poison. This particular plant, which Professor Strew named electri after the ancient Greek word electrum, and which means amber, is the first neotropical flower preserved in this way. It is also dated to be somewhere in between 15 to 45 million years old. This discovery is very important in the academic world, shedding 2. Turramiro tree. Easter Island is one of the most remote places on Earth, located about 2,200 miles from South America and 1,300 miles from the Pitcairn Islands, which are the nearest inhabited islands. They are most famed for the almost 900 statues known as moai, built there by the locals soon after their arrival on the island around the 13th century. But unbeknownst to many is the fact that the island didn't look anything like it is today. Over the centuries, these inhabitants have been cutting down the island's trees to such an extent that by the 17th and 18th centuries, the local civilization went into decline because of it. The arrival of the Europeans brought further degradation to the island with extensive agriculture, massive deforestation, and the introduction of grazing sheep. Jacob Roggeveen, the Dutch explorer who discovered the island on Easter Day back in 1722, described it as exceptionally fertile, but since then the topsoil has eroded and only 7.7% of the currently existing flora is endemic to the island. The last one was felled inside the Rinokel volcanic crater back in 1965. It is a small shrub tree measuring about 6 feet. 1. Prototaxites. First discovered in 1859 in Canada, prototaxites have baffled the academic world ever since. Found in many places around the world, these giant spires measured some 24 feet high and had a width of 3 feet, being dated as early as 420 million years ago and disappearing from the fossil record some 70 million years later. Most believe them to be some form of algae, lichen, or even a primitive form of conifer, but something didn't add up. Only in 2001, with Francis Huber at the National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C., did the mystery begin to unravel. He proposed that the huge trunks were actually fungi. He based his assumption on their internal structure, but had no conclusive evidence to back it up. To be fair, fungi aren't actually plants, being more closely related to animals. But it is important to note that fungi were the first organisms to call dry land their permanent home, and make the soil. Welcome to the City of Freedom. If you liked the video, you can subscribe to it by clicking on the bell button next to send me notifications.